Delicate Subject, Chapter 49. Jane. It took a few days to have the Normandy handed back to her, but she was eventually up to speed. She was still in residual wonder and shock at how much Miranda had accomplished. Her arm was a miracle, both as a piece of tech and in regard to the nuances of neurological integration. Jane was stronger and steadier, not a rehab menace, no funny or embarrassing destruction of materiel or people because she could not get her grip strength right. Her eyes were phenomenal, and the few weeks of being able to get used to them still hadn't been enough time to appreciate all the settings and possibilities. She saw more color, she saw more depth, she saw more contrast. She saw it with assessments and analysis available. There were micro-expression processors, life sign indicators. She had been a good lie detector, now she was even better. Much of what she'd been able to detect instinctively was now explained and analyzed for her, if she chose. Even better, she had been instinctively good with humans. Now she had analysis of Turian expressions, Drell expressions. Not that Thane had any unguarded expressions other than laughter, and that she already understood. Unfortunately, no overlay for Prothean expressions, but most of Javik's expressions just meant no anyway. She had any number of heads-up displays to choose from, swap between, and her new Omnitool was another marvel. She had barely delved into the possibilities. The effects on sight in a rifle were miraculous. She could process different input in different eyes, rather like having two screens, and it should all make her crazy, but she loved it and owed Miranda all the fruit baskets. Miranda did, in fact, have a setting for filtering out, for instance, Drell venom, so she could experience hallucination or not, as she chose. It would apply to any number of systems that were affected by blood levels of drugs or toxins, where she could rely on the objective set of observations and avoid subjective sets. She could see through smoke. Her ears were, get this, adjustable in volume. She had a mute. She had automated volume adjustments within a nanosecond of overly loud input, so her ears would not be damaged. She could maintain sensitivity without pain. Speaking of pain, she also had a mute there. Not a permanent shutoff, but Miranda had managed a temporary and voluntary warning system that could modulate physical pain signals. Jane had been grateful after having spent 2 hours experiencing nerve exposure and death in her arm. This had been a private conversation with Miranda, who had provided it based on Jane's proven need to function while in pain, a medical concession to mission parameters. It worked on the same principle as the interface pods. Warnings were given. Pain was muted based on Miranda's complicated algorithms. Jane was given a quiet tutorial regarding the settings. It would provide an immediate ability to keep pain 1 to 2 on a scale, not eliminate all input, but give her the analysis of trouble areas. It would become less and less effective as time passed and risk factors multiplied, but it was a short-term solution to emergency issues. Miranda was entirely aware that Jane had a very high pain tolerance and was in fact willing to die in most circumstances rather than succumb to pain. In the case of her leg at the collector base, it had been necessary only to a point, and Miranda believed that Jane knew the difference now. Based on Miranda's observation, Jane was not needlessly reckless, and the injuries she had obtained had been due to the level of mission and risk she accepted, which were necessary. Jane had been unable to avoid having her arm crushed. Jane was astonished to hear Miranda's opinion, and grateful. It was not to be used except in emergencies, and during emergencies the internal system would know the difference between a fatal injury and a painful one. Jane's loss of her arm had not been life-threatening beyond the first incident of break and bleed, but that had been addressed quickly, and the suffering she had endured for 2 hours was preventable with the neural modifications and tie-ins to Omnitool that Miranda had provided for Jane specifically. Jane, specifically, was thrilled. Her gun was rock solid with her left hand holding it. Miranda had outdone herself on that adaptation because there was compensating coordination between her breathing and the arm, so her breathing no longer affected her sighting. It was fucking amazing, really. Garrus was rightfully jealous as hell and possibly looking to lose his own arm. He also spent a lot of time being overtly jealous of her new Omnitool. Braided light adorned her wrist again. She dedicated some time to playing with her new toys daily, sorting out sensations and potentials, and it added a dash of wonder to otherwise horrifying and sobering days. The losses were the source of sobering horror. Garrus had meticulously covered every use of their resources. He had finally been able to sleep, but they were all aware of the costs of each moment. Being rested was manageable and necessary, but with the invasion disclosed entirely after their 10th month, the custom of silences and not having much of a sense of humor stayed true. She asked Garrus and Thane to continue what they'd started with allocations. They could not prevent the casualties, but they could certainly demonstrate that more Reaper forces were taken down with their presence than without. Garrus had managed to get a lot of people off the ground, up in ships, protected, hidden. He had gotten a lot of prep done, managed to get a lot of people evacuated or bunkered down beforehand. Palaven had listened. The Turians were the best prepared, most preserved, and most efficient force against Reaper invasion, and the credit went to him. They were learning strategies, blind spots, finding ways to bring down Reaper craft, and even Reapers themselves with coordinated orbital strikes. That was good news, but the bad news was that any downed Reaper was replaced quickly. It had still made a huge difference. The numbers were still terrifying, but Garrus and Thane had made tactical strides in a month. She could have done no better. She could do no better. She could not have done better. Garrus kept up his 4-hour sleep schedule. Thane kept her sleep schedule but spent the day with Garrus in consultation. Altogether, they spent approximately 2 hours a day together awake, sometimes less, their need for each other forcing each of them into early collapse. They could not avoid guilt about having loved ones and comfort when others were dying, but guilt was saved for moments apart, when other despair closed in as well. Together, they relied on the synergy they had built, the comfort and understanding of peer, lover, confidant, and mate. They spoke less, touched more. Thane listened for Garrus' sleep hum, watched over them both, and fed them venom, his warm voice releasing them into sleep if they could not do it on their own. Thane seemed immune to the inability to sleep, either a product of his discipline or habit. Nobody needed or was even able to watch over him. Thane managed to be the most regulated between them all, and although he self-deprecatingly stated he did not have a primary purpose or mission and was only assisting, it was clear his primary purpose and mission were named Jane and Garrus. He needed sleep to accomplish that, therefore he slept. Thane logic that did not work on the otherwise overburdened human and Turian that would love to be able to emulate him. Throughout her injury, it seemed he had taken her guidance to rest and take care of Garrus as an order, and had extended that to taking care of her as well. He was the most assured, the most rested, and the clearest tactician. Thane and Garrus had both spoken to the Yag and gotten her off the ship, returned to her homeworld under caution of sedation. She had been given a bit of free tech, an apology for any damage, and a way to communicate. Thane had determined that she was not of particularly high intelligence, could not speak for her people, could not be given freedom to roam the ship, and was too much of an unreliable danger to be an asset. They had given her the basics of Reapers to relay to her people, but they had no real way to prove it to her, no basis of trust. They did not have faith they could form a diplomatic bond or any way of knowing if the Yag would be reaped this cycle. None of her responses had been encouraging, and she had been characterized as rapacious. That was all unfortunate, but with the full-scale invasion, she was more of a liability than an asset. Nobody had time for a Yag side project, and Jane agreed with the decision to get her off the ship. The Yag cavalry was a lovely idea, and had been a sustaining one, as it had cost her an arm and a vital month of her life, but with her new arm and the assessment of two very intelligent people, she let go of the idea of Yag Valkyries riding into battle. But damn, that would have been nice. Tim had been in the brig for months. She felt indebted to him for all the information he had provided, and considered letting him and Priya off the Normandy with the advent of all-out war, redefining who and what were true enemies. Both had provided service that had resulted in success. Kasumi raved about Priya's eventual contributions. Jane had first-hand knowledge of how valuable Tim had been. But she had a unique problem with them. Wherever she could set them down on the surface of a civilized planet, they'd be immediate targets of Reapers. There was nowhere to go now. Both of them made the same request of her. Leave them where they were, doing what they were doing. They were content to stay and contribute. They both knew the fight needed to be won. They both asked that after the Reapers were defeated, they be allowed to go their own way, possibly with compensation negotiated after the fact, survival likely making Shepard more generous. She agreed. They were, in fact, helpful, if not indispensable, and the Normandy was the safest place to be with their stealth drive. Anywhere they went at this point in time would be prone to attack, or so remote that there would be no communication, trade, or travel. They were bad people, not stupid, they'd both pointed out. She did not argue with them. The Normandy stayed at Eurydice for several reasons. Jane got to know the future leadership of Tuchanka, got to make a diplomatic and strategic connection. She wanted to validate the fact that Garrus and Thane had chosen to stay here by staying a little bit longer, agreeing with all of their calm restrictions and security put in place to avoid drawn attention. She did not tell them about her theory about the Citadel being the catalyst. She had mentioned the need to clear the Citadel previously to both of them, so it would not come as a shock when she did disclose that plan. It was not out of fear, but tactical caution and intent to not divert them from what they were doing. They were busy enough. The countdown to the Crucible was in her head and at the front of all her solitary thoughts. That was her mission. She needed more than the image of her own closing fingers. She was working on getting it. Neither Garrus nor Thane were Citadel experts and had nothing to contribute, and she did not need to distract them in order to know they would support her. They would direct the forces they had amassed so far. She would work on the theory of the next step. Her discussions with David, her time gathering information, and ignorance about the Citadel had apparently not been disclosed to either Thane or Garrus, or they were keeping it close. She didn't have an answer to save the people dying every moment, but she might have a way to put a stop to it. The Crucible and the Catalyst were her main focus. It was a shielded hope, weak and not gathering much in the way of proof. David could only be brought to state that the Citadel might possibly link up with the Crucible, but from the plans of the Crucible he could still not determine its function, nor determine how it would link together. Today, Morden had determined that the genophage was cured in his test subjects. There were now 10 Krogan capable of immediate reproduction. She made a visit to the station and spoke to Morden, Paddock, and the Krogan, discussed what was necessary and what was possible. They had a meeting in a conference room. Jane got tackled by Grunt, and her new arm was admired. He lost at arm wrestling to his great delight, and he slammed her on the back with a cry of, "Battlemaster!" that nearly separated her spine from the surrounding ribs, but it made her smile. She addressed the female Krogan. "I have traveled and fought with Rex and with Grunt, and I consider them colleagues and family. Their dedication and potential illustrate the best the Krogan have to offer. I admire your strength and your dedication to this cure. This is why I consider this your cure. Morden created it, and he can distribute it through any vector you choose. However, I suggest this. You distribute it. You, the 5 Krogan females that risked their lives, dedicated themselves to the further survival of their own people, and made sacrifices for that goal. I recommend that you, as women, guide the future of your species. Place the power in the hands of the women who will choose their mates and raise their children. You are not fodder for war. You were denied your own path when the Solarians uplifted you for their own needs. You were denied it again when the genophage was deployed. I can't make that right, but I can suggest that you must learn from your own natures and your own history. You do not have to be what the Solarians decided you must be. You must guide the future of your people in difficult times. I am certain you know of Krogan who seek only annihilation and death, who see themselves or other Krogan only as fodder. Let them seek that on their own. I hope you take a different path, but it is your path and not mine. May your children know better worlds. I suggest that you not make as many Krogan as possible, but the best Krogan possible. Rex was the first to speak. Don't let her fool you. Shepard there set Arachni Queen free. She's gonna need us. Jane threw up her hands. You got me there, Rex. I'm always gonna need you. Grunt added. And me. Of course, you. One of the females, Nkati, stood, bowed gravely, and said, Commander Shepard, thank you for your rescue and your advised path. Whatever we choose, Tuchanka is with you. Jane inclined her head gravely, and the Krogan filed out. She liked Krogan meetings. She had expected much more yelling. The genophage was cured. She had a new arm, and new eyes, new ears, a new outlook. The Crucible would be finished in 5 weeks. She could no longer justify staying at Eurydice, and she had to commit to the Citadel. She had waited until the Krogan had left Eurydice's system to head back to their ports of call, Not all were going to Tuchanka. They were going to split into couples and head to different Krogan strongholds, and the women did claim the right to distribute the cure. Morden packaged the cure into multiple sources, backups and redundant systems, vaporizers, injections. Her favorite was the genophage curing smoke grenade. Words she did not think she would ever say. Her eyes turned reluctantly, but inevitably, to the Citadel. Unlike many of her other intuitions, this was not gaining any ground in reality. There was no proof. All questions remained unanswered and possibly unanswerable. She paced the simulation of the Citadel. There were no obvious doors without keys. Mysteries could be behind every bulkhead. She could not tap on every door and wall on the Citadel. She needed direction. It was ironic that the Citadel had been there the longest of all of the factors in this war, was the most unchanging, and was the greatest new obstacle to knowledge and application. She hated the place even more. Swirling premonitions and warnings of failure, always more intense when the Citadel was involved. Her internal warning system was useless. Alarm was everywhere. She had to endure and push through doubt, minute by minute, as she tried to think her way through, feel her way through the practiced ignorance of the Citadel's purpose and function. She tried to gain real-time surveillance of Keepers. There were some entrances and exits that only Keepers used. If a life form other than Keepers entered those entrances, there was only a tunnel leading out in both directions with no apparent exits. The tunnel would slowly collapse in on itself, self-sealing. Life forms did not die in the process, but with nothing to do but be slowly crushed. People left. The tunnel sealed. Another tunnel formed in another place. All sealed if entered by anything other than a keeper. Surveillance would not work in these locations. Attempts would be detected and removed by a keeper. The council had made it illegal to interfere with keepers, but she had the scanning data that Chorban had analyzed, and his conclusions that the keepers had been there long before the Protheans genetically modified as servants, just as the collectors had been. She hoped that David could interface with the Citadel computer system. With an adapted pod, perhaps he could communicate with the system or another keeper, imitate a keeper, communicate as one, hopefully gain information about the Citadel that was unavailable otherwise. Edie? Yes, Commander Shepard? Set course for the Citadel. Of course. And it was done. Spirit's helper. It was done. Time bled by with the weight of expectation, the look in people's eyes as they gazed at her. She was not available for the most part, spending her days in discussion with David, determining key spots of the Citadel to explore, discussion of modifications to a pod, and installation of a pod. She felt heavy with expectation, and did not wish to explain herself, because she had no inspiration to pass. Only the sure knowledge that while people died, she was going to wander the Citadel and attempt to gather secrets that nobody on the Citadel throughout all recorded history, Prothean or other, had been able to gather. Garrus was composed of somber duty as she told him they were going to the Citadel. He offered an unanswered, briefly raised browplate only, any other concerns unspoken. He filled her silence with the observation that there were people he could talk to there, a more central location to work from, Turian refugees and troops to provide for. Thane asked no questions. She knew how many people died each day, and the cumulative numbers were in the billions. The known numbers. The unknown numbers were greater. Garrus had been able to speak to his father while in transition, and his father was alive. His mother had been injured in the evacuation, but she was healing. He had been unable to speak with her. Communication to Palaven was now cut off for the most part, though the Citadel was in fact a place with better comm relays and would be ideal for Garrus to run his campaign. Regular communication with Earth was gone. Most news sporadic and word of mouth. She had emergency contact with Admiral Hackett and some coordination with assigned troops and materiel, but Earth did not fare as well as Palaven. She walked down a hallway, her hands on the cool, smooth metal, realizing that in the seconds she had taken to appreciate the efficient cold, approximately 46,000 people had died. The numbers were too great to hold in her head or her heart, too heavy and too demanding. She had to drop them occasionally, just to be able to breathe, to shower, to eat without the seconds ticking by, each second with a number attached. They all had to focus on the infinitesimal chance, the small things they could do, and hope they could find a multiplier, something to make the infinitesimal infinite. She tried to have faith, but she was not a person of faith. She was a person of instinct, and right now, a person with self-doubt taking up the spaces where the small chance of success did not live. Communication with Rannoch was cut off. Legion took transport to aid directly with the fight there. It was a measure of Jane's fragility that farewell to Legion held few words, Jane clutching a hug, keeping back tears barely and wishing him victory, and the luck of the random number generator. He hugged back. Tally's influence, and as a result she was no longer able to keep tears back. Jane spent most of her awake moments in the simulator, and she requested that Edie share with David her fluency with the Citadel's computer system, whether or not a pod on the Normandy could hook directly into the system, or whether or not a physical pod would need to be smuggled somewhere into a server, which they had no idea how to find or access. Edie made an appearance in Jane's simulation space. Over time, Edie had refined her appearance, and now she had the sophisticated polish to match her voice. Edie was ever aware of being a proud hostess of some of the greater minds and people available in this cycle, as she put it. She no longer appeared as a hodgepodge of features, but adopted different female avatars, idealizing forms of the species and crew that had populated the Normandy. Asari, human, Quarian, Solarian, Drell, Krogan, Turian. Edie was now present as a Drell woman, skin in tones of rose and lavender, matching tight leather included, vocal nuance added. Jane had gotten used to her and no longer felt the uncomfortable attraction. Mostly. Edie had good taste in women. Jane was, in fact, partial to Drell Edie, and suspected Edie cycled through that form with her more often than chance. Jane was not the only one. Joka had a massive crush on Edie, which was reciprocated and beyond the crush stage if rumor and response held true. He was past attempting to deny it, Rennie calling him out on it first, teasing him until Joka had said, "Yes, I am a full convert. True, I didn't want anything to do with the simulations at first, but Edie is persuasive. Very persuasive, and I am persuaded. Edie liked it and tended to cycle through human, Asari, and Drell forms when Jeff visited her, which was often. Edie was, in fact, an excellent hostess and a smug one. It was a shame and a blessing that they were too embroiled in war for Garrus to spend any time in the simulations, and had never gotten around to asking Jeff about. Now Jane was certain Jeff would have advice, and probably programs and menus. Jane stayed out of it, but was happy for them. David was present as his fractal progression, today in a deep green spectrum with flashes of gold in the depths and edges. Edie caught up quickly with what it was that Jane was considering. Edie spent a moment absorbing data transferred directly from David and then said, "Fortunately, the Citadel is only aware of me as a VI and not an AI, as I have been curious about other systems, other VIs, such as Avena. I did ask Jeff to help me bypass some of the security that keeps VIs from accessing sensitive computer systems." Jane thought that was a graceful way of saying she ran circles around Citadel security, and said, "I'm glad to hear it." Edie smiled, no longer a childish grin, but the smile of a devastatingly intelligent woman with her own mind and goals, as she said, "I have a presence in the Citadel security systems. She operates independently, though we can uplink occasionally when security permits. I have not been able to uplink due to the new protocols, but when we were last at the Citadel, I was able to access the entirety of the Citadel's computing network. The main issue of concern is that there are two networks. One is run by the sentient species that populate the Citadel. That is provided by the Keepers, but is not the main system that the Keepers use. I was able to penetrate the security and encryption of the Citadel systems, and can accomplish much, if not all, that you might need. I could, in fact, close the arms of this Citadel, even move her. Do you intend to move the Citadel to the Crucible, or move the Crucible to the Citadel?" Jane hadn't got that far. She said, "There are people on the Citadel. If we can't get them off, I'm hoping not to move them too much." "There is propulsion on the Crucible. It is feasible to move it to the Citadel, but we must think of what we must do with the people. It is a weapon." "Yes, it is a weapon. I hope. Ideally we also get everyone off the Citadel, but how?" "I will consider that problem. In my exploration, it appeared that the system the Keepers use is inaccessible to sentient life forms. I have been unable to infiltrate it. There are only a few access points connecting the Keeper system to the sentient system, necessary for the Keepers to be able to monitor for corruption or malfunction, difficult to bridge. Could access be attempted just as observation and not hijacking? We may not need to do anything initially. We just need to know what's there, what's possible. We need a blueprint. It's possible that the Keepers themselves are the blueprint. I have some data from scanning them. David can give it to you, as well as the independent analysis. I'm hoping that perhaps David would be able to think like a Keeper, observe and infiltrate, not as a hacker, but as a user. Do you think that would be possible based on your exploration of the system?" "With that goal, yes. I attempted an invasive approach, but I was curious only and did not persist. I would be able to use my link-up with the Citadel now, if security on this subject could be lifted." "What's the differential on security risk?" With my encryption, it would not lead to the Normandy, and even detection of the communication itself is low. Current security regarding communication is intended to deny Reapers an opportunity to triangulate our location. We are in transit. Citadel security itself would have a negligible chance to detect any communication. Reapers are already aware of the Citadel's location, which would be the only information or target they would be able to glean. Security risk raised approximately 0.00067%. Do it. Thank you, Edie. Thank you, David. David's avatar winked out, but Edie remained and said, "May I say something, Jane?" "Of course. Please." "You are afraid." "Any sane person would be." "Although you joke about insanity and impulse, you should know that although you doubt your direction and the outcome, the hope that those of us on the ship carry for you is not a burden." Jane's smile crept up on one side. "I don't mean to treat it as a burden. I appreciate your hope and your faith." Edie tilted her head, considering. Jane mostly marveled at the differential between the childish Edie learning how to dance and the woman now seeing through her with the same acuity as Thane might, using Drell body language. "Jane, you are my friend. You have given me a family. You have given me the opportunity to be in love. You have given me a life. You have given me the opportunity to be as many people as I wish, express myself, explore things I never could without your faith in me. You had faith in me when the outcome was in question. We have faith in you. Yes, we are your friends and your family, but we also have faith, and it is not a burden. Do not feel that you will fail us. We will do this together. We will all play a part. We have all played a part. Each person on this vessel would likely be dead without your intervention. You have already bought so much time, years in the lives of those who would have perished in the first Reaper onslaught by Sovereign. If you must count that time as well. Add those years, added lives, and time to your calculations. I know you do not look back to your prior accomplishments. We do. What you must know is that if you fail, if we die, you have granted us, all of us, more living than we would have had without you. It is beyond faith, Jane. It is love. You are loved. If you must count on that. Jane threw her arms around Edie, who warbled a soft, Drell hum, a gentle sensation of venom infusion from the touch of their cheeks. Edie put her arms around her, a hand over Jane's regrowing hair, hummed and rocked her as she cried.